start some information looking at the development of fundamental motor skills. And typically we divide these into locomotor and object control skills. In our textbook, you'll see that they've then subdivided the object control skills into manipulative skills and ballistic skills, I think, are the two divisions they use. But for the MSU chart today, we're just going to look at object control and locomotor. All right, so let me pull up the PowerPoint here. Hopefully you've all got a copy of your MSU chart somewhere where you can see it. Okay. All right. So we talked a little bit yesterday about the idea that in order to progress to more complicated motor skills, we have to pass through various layers of rudimentary skills and fundamental skills, and then we can build on the foundation that we build with our fundamental skills, and we can start learning other sports skills, we can start joining skills together and playing games, we can learn lifetime kind of leisure activity skills, but we need this foundation, first of all, of our fundamental skills. Right, so we're going to take a look at some of them. I'm not going to cover all of the ones that are on the MSU chart. Once I show you how to use it, you'll see how they all work. So we'll start with running. And running has, at the fundamental level, remember, so we're not talking about an Olympic sprinter or someone running down a football field, right? We're talking about fundamental running, right? So it has 4 stages, and each stage has characteristics that we can identify that stage with, all right? And when you look at the whole chart, it might be a little bit overwhelming, and you're like, well, how can I possibly learn all these to identify these stages? But actually, you can cheat a little bit, all right? So what you need to do is find a characteristic that identifies one stage from another stage. And then you don't have to learn the whole list. You can just hone in on that one characteristic that fully identifies that stage. Okay? So for stage 1, stage 1 looks quite weird, right? So the individual's arms are held up quite high, and typically we wouldn't expect to see stage 1 running in an older child or an adult, right? So whilst we say that these skill development are age related, right? Remember, they're not necessarily age dependent, but you wouldn't expect to see stage 1 in an older child, right? This is really a toddler, preschooler kind of transition. So stage 1, arms are up high, and the legs are quite wide. The knees tend to be bent. The feet might be turned out, but it's very flat-footed, like they pick their leg up and they put it back down. So there's a lot of up and down movement, but not a lot of forward movement when you're looking at stage 1, right? It tends to be very choppy like this. So With a little bit of practice, the brain can adapt that initial pattern and make it more efficient. All right? So the brain learns as it goes along, and hopefully this child has either an older sibling or cousin or parents who are running around with it and exhibiting a much more mature pattern for the brain to learn from. Okay? So gradually, the brain's like, well, this is kind of, I'm not getting anywhere really with this. It'll drop the arms down around the waist, right? And it's still pretty flat-footed, but it tends to be more noisy because there's more force being applied to the floor. And you might, towards the end of stage 2, get a little bit of heel-toe and not completely flat-footed. All right? So for me, I can identify stage 1 from stage 2 depending on where the arms are, because trying to do it by whether it's flat-footed, stage 1 and stage 2 can be flat-footed. So that doesn't specifically identify which stage they're in, right? And although we don't have it as a characteristic on stage 2, the feet are still pretty wide in stage 2. So for me, when I'm watching children, I use the arm position to help me. Are their hands up here, or are their arms down around their kind of trunk and waist, right? And then we get to stage 3, and stage 3 is a big change, okay? Because in stage 3, their arms will be pretty much down, but instead of having their arms bent, which we know is efficient, their arms tend to be straight. So they run with arms that are pretty straight, and the arms are starting to swing in opposition to the leg movement. So a big, big difference from stage 1 and stage 2. We now get some arm swing, but the arms tend to be very stiff. Okay? If you're able to pick it up, and it depends what surface they're on, what shoes they're wearing, you would also see some much more predominant heel-toe action. But that's quite hard to pick up without a camera, for me anyway, right? And then we get to stage 4. So if we get enough practice at running, right, and we're watching other people run, then eventually the brain will take these straight arms and start to bend them a little bit, right? And we get oppositional arm swing with the elbows bent, right? At that point, right, when you've got someone who is stage 4, now I have the opportunity to start really working on their technique and their style, and you know, the fact we want a lot of body lean forwards, we want the arms pumping, right? Depending on how fast, you might want knee lift or heel drive, depends on the kind of running you're trying to train them to do, right? But if I have someone who is stage 2 or stage 3, and I want to teach them to run more mechanically efficiently, I'm going to be wasting my time, right? Because what we know is I can't jump from stage 3 to something that looks like sprinting, right? That doesn't happen. The brain doesn't work that way. So I have to pass through stage 4. So as a teacher, right, it's important to be able to identify which stage they're in, to know how to phrase my feedback and my cues for them, right? Because that helps me not get frustrated, right? It's really frustrating if you're a teacher and you have to keep saying the same thing over and over and over and no change is happening, right? So it's frustrating for me. It's frustrating for the child or the person, right? Because you're saying the same thing to me over and over and over again, and I'm trying, but you keep telling me I'm not doing it, right? So everybody ends up getting, okay? Which doesn't help anyone, and it doesn't make moving fun. And moving needs to be fun so that people want to do it, right? So I've got to wait until, right, this person has practiced. I've been running with them. I've been modeling better running style. And when their brain switches to stage 4, and they've had experience at stage 4, and it's consistently stage 4, now I can start teaching them some techniques, right? Now, to relate this back to our constraints triangle from yesterday, all right? Remember that we said we have an individual, a task, and an environment, and that these 3 types of constraints interact to impact the movement behavior that emerges, okay? So, a good example here would be if we took one of the female athletes who is going to be a runner in a much more advanced stage, right? And we put her in a pencil skirt and 4-inch heels, right? Does she run like an athlete?
Ezekiel raised his hand.
Sorry?
Ezekiel raised his hand.
Oh, okay.
I'm assuming he's just going to answer, so.
I was just going to say she would be at a disadvantage.
Right. So she would certainly be at a disadvantage, right, in a tight pencil skirt and 4-inch heels. And what you might see her do is this. What stage is that?
I think stage 2, stage 1.
Arms down, arms straight. Stage 3. But you're right in that she regressed. Okay? So if I change the constraints, this person who, if she's in her running shoes and her athletic gear, has a very advanced running pattern, I can change the constraints and her running pattern might become a stage 3 or lower. Right? Does that make sense? So it's not that adults don't exhibit these lower stages. It's that hopefully they've had enough running experience that given the right set of constraints, this is not the motor pattern we see. Okay? Questions? No? Okay. So, here's some diagrams that were drawn from actual film. that give you some visual help with trying to identify stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. All right? Oops. Okay. So, hopping is another locomotor skill, and if you are US born and bred, you have to be a little bit careful with your terminology here, because in the US, teachers and parents often call this hopping, right? Like a bunny. But that's not hopping, that's jumping, okay? So you've got to be a little bit careful that you use the correct terms for the correct skills, all right? Hopping means I take off one foot and I land on the same foot, all right? So this is hopping. Whoops, lose my microphone again. That's how I got broken last semester. Right, so this is hopping, one foot to the same foot, okay? And what we see in the development of hopping is that initially, in stage 1, the person is going to have the foot that's up in the air out in the front, right? And the hands are going to be up here, and they're going to hop like this. Okay? It's not very effective. Okay? So it doesn't take very much time if they're practicing that for that pattern to go away and something else to happen, because this is actually quite difficult to do. All right? So what happens for stage 2 is that this leg that's stuck out front that makes it really difficult drops down. The knee, though, still stays in front, and the foot starts to hang around the supporting leg and sometimes go behind the supporting leg. And once that happens, then we can lean forwards a little bit. All right? And the hopping that they're describing on the MSU chart is not hopping up and down on the spot, it's hopping forwards. All right? So, if I want to move forwards, I have to lean forwards, right? So I can't do that with my leg up here. But once I get to stage 2 and my leg has dropped down a bit, now I can lean forwards and move forwards a little bit. Okay? Stage 3, the free leg drops even further, and now the thighs kind of parallel to each other. That puts the foot way behind. That allows more body lean and means I can hop forwards more effectively. Okay. Now, given my experience, I wasn't involved in this research that came up with this chart. There was a lot of research done by a group at Michigan State University, that's why it's the MSU chart. And they filmed tons of children and teenagers doing these motor skills to create these developmental sequences. So they're very well supported by the research, and you only have to start watching people a little more closely to see that this is exactly what happens. Having said all that, I have to disagree with stage 4. Right? In my personal experience, what they describe as stage 4 is not fundamental hopping. It's highly advanced hopping. All right, so what they say stage 4 is a pendular hop. So when you do pendular hopping, you swing the free leg in opposition with the arms to drive you forwards. Right? It's really difficult. Try it next time you're outside and you've got good quality shoes on, good quality running shoes or training shoes. Give it a go. It's really difficult. Okay? Most adults find this very, very hard. Right? I used to use it as a I used to run a fitness class in another life a long time ago, ran a fitness class for a soccer team, and I used to use it as one of the drills they had to do. They hated that drill. They hated that drill. It's really difficult to swing that leg and move forwards and use your arms all at the same time. Okay? So I can't say it's wrong, because the research supports this, right? I'm just saying, in my opinion, I would not expect to see what they describe as stage 4 in young children, right? And I would expect people to have a lot of practice at hopping to see something that really looks like stage 4. So again, these diagrams were drawn from film taken during the data collection. So these were real people hopping. What I find interesting about this set of diagrams is, to me, all these children look like boys. And don't typically think of hopping as a boy's skill, so it's quite interesting to me. So if you look at the MSU chart, we have running, hopping, galloping and skipping, and long jump. So those are the locomotor skills that are on the MSU chart, okay? And the idea is the same, right? The concept is the same, no matter which skill it is, all right? So I don't need to stand here and go through every skill. You can have a look at your chart and go, okay, long jump, arms act as brakes, lots of vertical jump, and then in stage 2, arms act as wings, and then in stage 3, arms start to swing forward, right? So you can work through the idea of these stages, all right? Now, object control skills. Slightly different kettle of fish. Incorrectly, many adults, teachers and parents think that all fundamental motor skills are things that children just do, right? So as they get old enough, they'll just run, they'll just hop, they'll just jump, right? And they also tend to think that, oh, all kids can throw, all kids can catch, right? But that's not quite true, okay? Takes a lot of practice, takes equipment, right? And especially catching is a very complicated skill for the brain to coordinate, all right? So we see that actually what we need is practice and modeling. We need an adult or an older cousin or an older sibling who's doing this skill that I can watch, and then I can give it a try, and it's all fun, and so I keep trying, and gradually we move through the stages. Okay. Now, throwing, as you can see, has 5 stages, not 4. Throwing is mechanically very complicated, although it's the coordination and control issues for the brain aren't as bad as for catching, right? So we tend to see throwing, children are able to throw quite a long time before they're able to efficiently and reliably catch, okay? So, remember our film yesterday? Right? And I said, keep that picture in your mind because she's a classic stage 1. Right? They gave that little girl the ball and she did this. Right? So, stage 1. Wind up begins near the ear. Throw looks like a chopping action. Feet don't move. Body does not move. Everything is face on to the way the ball is going, and the only action really is at the elbow as the arm straightens to chop the ball down. Right? So try to visualize that film from yesterday, get onto your textbook webpage, find the film clips, and have another look and tie up the film clip with your stages on your MSU chart so that you can start to visualize what these stages look like. Okay. Stage 2, the brain's going, well, the ball's not going anywhere, right? and they're throwing the ball all the way across the room. So I'm going to change this arm action. And it moves to this kind of action, right? So it gets the idea that there has to be a swinging arm. It's just swinging in the wrong plane in stage 2, okay? So the feet don't move. The body starts off square. If they slam the door hard enough, it might make their body turn around, but it's inconsequential, it's not deliberate, right? It's because of what happens with the arm, right? So when they're in stage 2, this is the point where you as the adult has to be careful where you stand in relation to the child, right? Because they let go of the ball and it comes flying over there and smacks you in the face, right? Because you were expecting them to throw the ball forward, okay? So you can't use the foot action to identify stage 1 and stage 2 because the feet don't move in either stage. But the arm action is very different. So it's easy to identify stage 1 from stage 2 throwing by what is happening with the arm that has the ball. Okay. Stage 3, again, is a big leap in motor pattern. Right? We see big changes in stage 3 because now the feet move. Right? And the individual is going to take a step forwards as they throw the ball, right? So they don't take the arm back, they do take the arm up, they step forward and they throw. Okay? So what was wrong with what I demonstrated?
Wrong foot forward.
Wrong foot forward, right? So that is stage 3. Stage 3 is what we call ipsilateral. Okay, the same foot as the hand that has the ball steps forward. Which means I can't get any trunk rotation, right? So everything is square on, but I do see the foot move, which is a big change because the brain has now organized moving an upper limb and a lower limb at the same time. Okay? That's a big change in control. Now, interestingly with throwing, stage 3 is where people get stuck. So unlike the locomotor skills, you will often see, and you'll see me, right, throw in stage 3. I was a gymnast and a dancer. I never did anything with balls when I was little. So if I'm not thinking about what I'm doing, so if I'm wandering around the playground, there's a stone on the playground and I pick it up and I want to throw it over the fence, and as I let go, I'm like, I did it again, right? I have to concentrate very hard to step with the opposite foot. It's not natural for me at all to do that. So you'll see a lot of people who are not involved in something that uses throwing, right? It's not a game they play for fun at the weekends. You know, maybe they didn't engage much in the ball skills in PE, right? They don't perhaps have balls at home that they play with in the background. They do handstands in the back garden. They do handstands and cartwheels and climb trees instead, right? All those kinds of constraints, right? Everything ties back to our triangle. So stage 3 is interesting in throwing because you really get stuck there if it's not a skill that you practice and you're motivated to use. Okay? Stage 3 and stage 4 are easy to identify because in stage 4 they step forwards with the opposite foot. Stage 4 and stage 5 are relatively easy to identify if you're paying attention because in stage 4 there's not really any rotation. They step with the other foot, but they step straight forwards and everything tends to stay square on to the ball direction, all right? But when they get to stage 5, we start to see the wind-up come down, right? Once the wind-up comes down, it turns the shoulders a little bit, and then as they step and throw, we start to see some rotation. Now, it's often what we call block rotation, means the whole trunk moves in one piece. When you watch a really good thrower, they use what we call segmental rotation, so they will take their hips and then their tummy and then their shoulders, right? I know the theory on how to throw properly, I just can't actually do it very well. Okay, so we get to stage 5, we've got a little bit of a backswing happening, we've got a little bit of rotation happening, and we've got a relatively short oppositional step. Okay? So again, as the teacher, this is important to understand, right? Because if I want to teach someone how to throw a football, and they are in stage 3, we're not going to get very far, right? I have to get them to at least stage 4 and preferably stage 5. And now we can start really trying to throw the football and back up and throw it a long way, all the way down the street. Right? But if you try to teach that skill to someone who is certainly below stage 4 from a throwing perspective, everybody's just going to get upset and frustrated. Right? Unless you're a very, very clever teacher, right? And you can use the right verbiage to keep someone motivated, to keep trying. Right? But for most people, you need this to move on, right? That's why I love our triangle, because it gives us lots of ideas about what's happening, but I also like that Seefeld's model because it's very clear that we have to have this competency at our fundamental motor skills to get over the proficiency barrier to start learning the other skills, right? The proficiency barrier lies at the end, at the right-hand side of the MSU chart. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. We have to get them competent. Competent is the final stage. Right? Can we get them competent in the fundamental version of the skill? And then we can start teaching the more complicated versions of the skill. Okay? So, more film pictures. Give you a visual. And then another object control skill is kicking. Okay, and here they're looking at a kick where someone would be running up and kicking a ball that's stationary. So even the fundamental version of kicking is relatively simplified because we don't have ball movement yet, and as soon as you add in ball movement, everything goes kaplooey, right? So stage one, they don't run up to the ball, right? And they just kind of toe it with the end of their shoe, right? So they toe and they lean backwards, and so sometimes you'll see them step backwards. Okay. Then in stage two, they also don't run and kick the ball. Okay. But in stage two, the brain sort of worked out there has to be a bit more leg action to make the ball go anywhere. Okay. So we get some wind up at the back, and as the leg swings, that makes the oppositional arm swing. And when we get to chapter 3, we'll talk about the mechanics of that. But again, my opinion is that the opposition arms and legs isn't something that's deliberate, it's something that's mechanical. Because you swing this leg, this arm automatically swings forward. Okay? Now, what you have to be careful of when you're assessing kicking is that if you tell the child to run and kick the ball, then that's what most of them are going to try and do. So you have to be really alert to what's actually happening at the point of the kick. Because what you'll see is they'll run, they'll stop, and they'll kick the ball, right? That's stage 2, right? It might look like stage 3 because there was a moving approach, but if you pay attention, they stop and then they kick, right? So to be stage 3, there has to be a little bit of flow in the movement. Right? So they've got to move in and step and kick kind of all as one entity. Now the move in might be very slow, but as long as the move in and the leg swing and the kick are connected, then you could say they were stage 3. Right? And then stage 4 looks a lot more like something you would see in a junior soccer game, right? They can run and kick, and it's quite coordinated most of the time. They may have some backward lean as they swing the leg through, and there may be some leap or hop afterwards if they've run fast and they've swung the leg really hard. In my opinion, again, I have lots of opinions in motor development, but I get a bit frustrated with parents putting very young children into soccer camp or, the recreation soccer class after school or at the weekends. Because if they are stage 1 or stage 2, they're nowhere near ready to try to join in a game, let alone cognitively, right? You can forget the whole cognitive part. That's not ready until they're about 7 or 8. So the fact that we have 4 and 5-year-olds running around trying to play soccer, they're very cute and they're getting exercise, which is yay, but if they're stage 1 or stage 2, they can't really engage. Right? I wouldn't consider putting any child into that kind of environment until they were at least stage 3. Means you've got to do some work at home in the backyard, right? If that's what you want them to do and they want to go and play because their friends are playing, then play with them in the back garden.
Ezekiel raised his hand.
Sorry?
Ezekiel raised his hand.
Oh, go Z. What do you need?
I'm just curious, so when teaching younger children, what have you found most effective, like leading by example or like explaining it like in detail? Like,
Yeah, no. Definitely leading by example. It depends, and when I say young, I'm talking 5, 6 and younger, so you might be thinking a little bit older than that, but yeah, I don't spend very much time trying to explain what I want them to do. It's much easier just to show them and maybe give them one, like you can do things like with the throwing, you could let them pick a colour scarf that they like and tie that scarf around the ankle of the opposite foot and tell them to step with their scarf and throw the ball.
Okay, so like little drills like that.
Yeah, but you've got to make them play, right? They have to be play. You've got to be creative. You can't say step in opposition. A 3 and 4-year-old have no idea what that word means. And even if you say step with the other foot, it probably isn't going to happen. Right? That kind of cue won't work with that age group. So you could put, if you've got, you can get those little feet-shaped poly spots. You can try to get them to stand on a poly spot and step to the foot poly spot. I've tried that. I've not had a lot of success with that idea. And I think mainly because when they're younger than 6, they don't see, certainly younger than 5, they don't see flat things very well. It's better if you have 3D shapes for them. So the scarf around the ankle tends to work much better if you've got the time to do that. I mean, if you're working with 15 children, you don't have the time to tie a scarf around every one of their ankles. And a lot of them can't do that for themselves at that age. So, it's really a kind of try it and see. If you're working with your own child or your nephew and it's one-on-one, the scarf idea works very well. But yeah. Lots of creativity when you're working with the little ones. But that's what makes it fun, And what I love about that age group is they love to move. Most of them. I mean, 98% of preschoolers love to move. You don't have to bother about motivating them to move. All you have to do is go out and run and say, come on, let's run fast, and the whole lot of them will run. Right? So it's just so easy to get them engaged in playing with movement, which is...
And I guess like another thing would be, like, since they're so young, I'm afraid that just giving them a lot of information all at once will kind of,
Yeah, you can't, you've got to keep, if you're going to give them information, one piece.
Yeah, a little by little.
But, yeah, and the other important thing is that you have to allow them to play with the skill. You can't dictate what you want the skill to do, right?
Right.
You've just got to put it out there and make sure the environment is safe, and if they decide to run round the entire garden when you only wanted them running around the patio, hey ho, right?
Right. Cool, but yeah, thank you.
No, great questions. Where are we? Ooh, talking too much here. All right, pictures. Okay, I'm going to switch to the whiteboard because there's just a couple of things I want to highlight. Okay, let's do this first. All right, now the MSU chart and the TGMD that we're going to do on Monday are both what we call total body approaches to assessment, all right? And so when you're looking at the MSU chart, you can use it a couple of different ways. You can look at it and use it as a way to identify the stage that the child is in so that you can provide developmentally appropriate feedback and cueing, like we were just talking about, see, right? Because there's no point in telling the child to swing their arm back to throw the ball if they're in stage 2, right? It's not going to happen. But the other way you can use it is literally as an assessment tool. So you can watch the child or have them try the skill. You can score it. You can provide teaching on that skill. And then you can assess it again after you've done 2 or 3 days teaching or a week's teaching or whatever you want to do, right? So we can use it as an assessment tool. Now the MSU chart does not have any normative tables on formal numbers tied to it. You'll see that the TGMD is different on Monday, okay? They're called total body approaches because to identify stage from stage, you're looking at a set of characteristics that give you a picture of the whole person. Right? That's different to the stages and assessment tool that's in the textbook that we'll get to in a couple of weeks. Okay? So we're looking at a form of assessment where we look at the whole skill in order to score it. Okay, that's all the total body approach means. Then the other thing I wanted to say again, because I'm not sure how well you can see when I'm patting at the board, I'm not sure how well you can see what I'm doing. So we have stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and let's say stage 4, right? And so this final stage, competency, would represent competency at that fundamental version of the motor skill. Okay? Once I'm at competency, and competency is the same idea as that proficiency barrier on Seefeld's model that I drew yesterday. Once I've got competency, now I can say, okay, so now I'm going to teach the next version, the more complicated version. And you probably have stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Now I would expect stage 4 of the fundamental version and stage 1 of the advanced version to look quite similar. But again, once I've reached competency at the fundamental skill, doesn't mean that I immediately become expert at the more complicated version, right? I now have another set of stages to go through to become expert at that skill. It's just we don't have the research to tell us what do those stages look like. But it's realistic to believe that those stages exist. Right? And then the other thing I just wanted to bring in was the idea that we looked at yesterday about universality and variability. Okay? When we are looking at these fundamental stages, we have universality because they're predictable. The research says this is what happens, right? Now, what's interesting is when you add in the variability, the individuality, because if you have a child, for example, who is a talented mover, right? Quite cognitively aware, and they sit with dad every weekend and watch the baseball game or the football game. So they've got a good mental picture, albeit possibly subconscious, about what throwing looks like, and you take them on the playground and you give them a ball, then they may do stage 3 straight away. Doesn't mean they didn't do stage 1 and stage 2 at some point in the past. But they may go straight to stage 3, and then your job is to, okay, now the first thing I've got to do is get them to step with the other foot. Right? So it all comes back to our constraints triangle. It all depends. The individuality can be structural, it can be functional, it can be linked with their environment that they're growing up in, right? Does that make sense? So I'm going to see, if I'm there right from the word go, I'm going to see stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, but one child might be in stage 1 for a month, right? Another child might be in stage 1 for like 10 minutes, and then they start swinging their arm across their body. Does that make sense? Okay, it's late. I talk too much. All right, have a great afternoon and a super weekend. And I will see you on Monday, and you'll need that TGMD3 sheet, either